Hi, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to talk about the topic of Oracle migrations and just how organizations of different sizes are dealing with the new pricing changes that have added some really new, really large surprise costs to their budgets. And this is driven by Oracle's new changes, which charge on a per employee basis, regardless of the amount of Java that you actually use. And we're going to talk about how Azul has helped a number of organizations to deal with those pricing changes by getting the problem to a manageable state where they don't have to pay those extreme costs. And we're going to hear firsthand from Chase Crum, one of our specialists, about how to tackle this problem.
Hi, I'm Chase. I'm the migration advisor for Azul's customers and partners in North America. On average, I manage about 15 to 20 migrations a year, moving hundreds of thousands of Oracle branded Java instances to Azul. My team has been doing that with 100% success rate since long before I got here.
That sounds awesome. And myself, I'm Eric Koslow. I'm a senior director of product management for Azul, and I help a number of organizations get the most out of their Java installations by finding different security vulnerabilities that they can deal with, prioritizing those, and helping them get a handle on the quantity of Java code that they have to simplify technical debt and improve developer efficiency. So Chase, I want to start out by talking about the question of why are different companies migrating away from Oracle? Like, let's just go to the base and what's the driver here?
Well, Eric, nobody's migrating for the fun of it, but Oracle is giving businesses plenty of good reasons to consider migrating. And while there are plenty of reasons to migrate, we typically see our customers fall into one of three categories. Some of our customers have just entered into the new licensing model for the first time. And where they've usually budgeted, a couple $100,000 for their Java licensing needs, they just had to write a multi-million-dollar check, and they don't want to do that again. And so they use that time between writing that check and their next renew date to begin migrating away from Oracle altogether. Other customers are already facing an audit from Oracle. They have a very narrow window to work with, and they know that on the other side of that window, they're going to have to write the same multi-million-dollar check. And so they have much less time, and they usually begin migrating right away. The third most common reason we see is our customers with high complexity environments. Think real-time industries and infrastructures. In their case, they just can't get the performance gains that they need from Oracle, and so the decision to migrate to Azul is much easier for them to make.
All right. So in the industry news, I have an article here about the Java licensing explanations in terms of complexity, costs, and audits. Can you talk a little bit about what licensing liability for Java means?
Sure. And while licensing should be a relatively simple concept, Oracle has found a great way to make it confusing for us all. There are a number of different licensing ranges that your Oracle Java instances can fall into. And it really depends on what version you're using. The newer versions of Java fall into a licensing range that don't yet require licensing, but they will. There's an expiration on that offer. Then there's the Java versions that are just old enough that they no longer require licensing, but now those are more of a security concern than a licensing concern. And then there's everything in the middle, and it's a big middle. And for those Java instances, that's where Oracle is really squeezing their customers financially. And unfortunately for all of us, most of our applications live in that space. And that's why it's incredibly important to know where your Java landscape falls into so that you can avoid these financial liabilities.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how to plan a migration. Like, let's say I'm in one of the three categories that you talked about of organizations that we deal with. And I reach out and I say, hi, Azul, I'm under the risk of getting one of these audits and I have a multi-million-dollar timeline on the line, whether it's coming up or whether it's coming up next year. What exactly do you do in order to get a handle on that?
Sure. Let me share this graph with you here. So as you can see, we only spend about 10% of our time planning a migration. In that time, we work with the project manager and we ensure that they have the resources that they need and that their infrastructure teams needs to have a solid understanding of the migration process. We help them develop a communication plan with their stakeholders and reporting, and we provide any technical assistance needed to ensure that the different teams are enabled for a successful migration.
All right. So in that planning phase, you go through and you talk about building out templates of how you're going to ask people for various information, but that's probably some cookie cutter things. And then a lot of time is spent on that discovery cycle right there. So let's talk a little more about what you do during that discovery cycle. Like, why is that the largest section?
Sure. As you can see, the heaviest lifting isn't in the execution phase, like you mentioned, it's in the discovery process. We spend the majority of our time and effort in the discovery phase. We need our customers to be confident that we've identified all of the Oracle branded Java instances. Missing a few here and there is enough to trigger that new licensing model. And so we're very thorough in that part of the migration project. Once we've completed the discovery phase, we begin an analysis and classification process. This allows us to start developing a migration strategy that's more tailored for their environment.
All right. A lot of organizations that I talk to, we speak with different IT administrators. So sometimes we have the expert Java developers, and sometimes we have a standard IT team that says, I don't really know all the ins and outs of Java. I know it's been a thing for 30 years. It's been present my entire career, but I don't know the details of it. So you mentioned the role of classification of some JVMs are one license, some JVMs are another type. And it sounds like there's a way of chunking that work into groups. So can you talk a little bit about classification, what that is and what it means, and then how you do it?
Sure. Let me share with you a sample of what a surface level analysis looks like. Here is a classification output. And as you can see, we can see at a glance what our license vulnerabilities are. We're able to determine what's in scope and what's truthfully out of scope for instances that are not branded by Oracle. We can see our versioning range so we can determine the level of effort, but we also get an insight into what type of Oracle Java we have installed. And while there's a lot of different versions of Java, there's really only a couple ways it can be installed. And I like to refer to the common well analogy. If you think of a village, and in the center of that village, there's a well. Now that well was installed for the entire village and their water needs. But some of the homes in that village have indoor plumbing. They brought their own water and they won't use that common well. They don't really need to. That's the difference between your bundled installations and your system-wide installations, which are really the only two ways they can be installed. And so as we look at this classification system, we start to narrow down what's in scope, what versions we're working with, and we break these down into smaller groups. Those groups would be like installation methods with like migration methods so that we can then start to automate all of that. And automation is really going to be your friend because if you tried to manage these one at a time, you'd be here forever. So by providing this kind of classification analysis, we can create smaller chunks of this infrastructure with single solutions so that we can then integrate and migrate them more efficiently.
All right. So at a base, organizations tend to have a lot of Java. And the first thing you did in order to generate this chart is you looked across the org, you figured out all of the Java that they had from different inventory techniques. And there's a lot that they maybe did or didn't know about. But then it looks like we can take that down and maybe we had about like 22,000 different installations of Java here. But do I, as the administrator, need to go out and deal with all 22,000, or is there a subset of that?
No, as you can see, the total number of JVMs that were detected in this environment was a little over 22,000. But if you look on the left there, you can see that those are a number of different vendors. And right now, we're really only concerned with migrating off of the Oracle instances. So that allows us to reduce it down in scope, and we get a more realistic idea of our level of effort in front of us. You can see that there's only about 7,500 instances in the entire environment that are Oracle branded to begin with.
All right. So during the discovery phase, it looks like you found a large number of Java at about 22,364, that I-12 there. And it turns out that as part of the audit or things that I need to worry about and be concerned with, it's only about a third of that, which is the number of unique installations of that Oracle Java, because that's the one that the large bill is coming from.
Sure.
All right, so now we have those. We found them. We know the Oracle installations that we need to deal with. What do you do during the actual migration phase? Like, how do you go about changing the JDK from something that poses a liability risk to something that no longer poses a risk?
Well, for the later versions of Java, it really is a one-for-one swap effort. We're able to take our version of Azul's JVM and drop it in place of the existing Oracle instance, and it just works. It isn't until we get into the much older versions or the legacy versions, where we see deprecated functionality that doesn't really exist in modern infrastructure anymore, but that we still have to support because they can't really abandon it. And that would be in things like applets. So where we don't really have problems migrating these, we do recognize the challenges of some of these older versions. They take a bit more planning and a bit more deliberate level of effort in configuration, but we've yet to see something we couldn't migrate off of.
All right. So as I'm up against a time crunch of I have until the following date before I get my multi-million dollar bill, it's probably going to sound pretty difficult and concerning of, oh, I have to work on all 7,600 machines here in order to migrate. And what if I run into problems? What are some of those things are gonna look like? And if I don't know that much about Java, I'm probably going to be concerned about those. So what are the types of compatibility problems that people may run into, may not run into, or what should I be concerned about, and what maybe am I concerned about that I don't need to be concerned about?
That's a great question. And I want to be very clear that we don't have instances we can't migrate. We do have instances that require more of our attention, that cause us to slow down and be a little more deliberate in our approach. So anything, version after version 8, we're able to migrate very simply. We're able to automate very simply, and there's not a lot of complication in those solutions. In the earlier ones, we have a couple different concerns that we try to address. We have deprecated functionality like applets that we need to be a little more deliberate in our configuration to ensure that when they do migrate, we maintain the functionality of the applets. We also have security concerns that we try to address when you get into version 7 and version older. Now that's considered dead code by Oracle, but that doesn't mean that the companies that are using it can just abandon it. They have them in their infrastructure because something in their infrastructure still needs it. And so Azul is able to provide legacy support with security patching and updates for even those versions that Oracle has already abandoned.
All right. And you mentioned that you haven't found anything where you haven't been able to migrate. So are there concerns that people need to have about that for some reason they're going to be the special case that one of their apps won't be able to do the migration?
Absolutely not. After hundreds of thousands of these a year, we have a 100% success rate. We've yet to see anything we couldn't migrate.
Got it. And do all of these installations need to migrate? Like I notice in your Oracle instance types identified, you have some that are Oracle products, some that are bundled installations. Do I need to migrate the Oracle product ones as well?
Well, and that's a good question. I mean, and what we really need to look at is what the mandate for this migration is. Typically, our customers are either migrating away from a license liability, in which case we're only going to focus on the Oracle branded instances and we can safely ignore the rest. Some of our customers are looking for continuity throughout their environment, and those we would approach on a much broader base. But for the majority of our customers who are just migrating away from Oracle, we can safely ignore a large portion of this infrastructure.
Okay. So let's take a look back at your chart. And I saw that you had a validation phase on there because I go through, I do the work. You've helped me safely migrate. You've handled a lot of my concerns. I don't need to worry about the compatibility because you've done your diligence of figuring out what version you need to swap it with. Talk to me a little bit about that validation phase of, in particular, how do I discover and validate that Oracle Java hasn't made its way back in?
That is a very big concern and an important one. As we go through the migration phase, uh, we are keeping track for our reporting sake of what has been migrated and what is left to do. And we like to run those discoveries a few times throughout the migration phase just to make sure that our progress numbers reflect what's in the infrastructure. But almost always we find something that we call creep. And that is where the Oracle Java instances, even though we've migrated away, are starting to make their way back in. They're creeping back into your environment. Now, in the server environment, that's not as much of a concern because you typically have one or two or a small handful of administrators. They all know what's going on and they're all on the same page. We see it creep a lot in the desktop environment space where the users have admin privileges, and they often do. And they make the determination that they need a particular piece of software, and that software has brought in an Oracle branded Java instance that they might not have even been aware of. So as we go through the validation phase, we're looking for two things. We want to make sure that we have successfully migrated everything we're aware of off of Oracle Java, but we also want to check to make sure nothing has crept back in. And if it has, we need to find out how it's getting back in and help them mitigate that as well.
All right. Do you mind if I take a moment here and talk about the way that we do this with Intelligence Cloud for our live tracker of Java?
Sure.
All right. If you don't mind, I'll share my screen here. One of the capabilities that we have within Azul is Intelligence Cloud, a SaaS suite that helps people track the different JVMs that they are running and using. And right here, I have a JVM inventory report of, for our organization, every time that we've run a Java application, I get a list of which host name it's on, what particular Java version it is, and then this item over here called the main method, which represents what the application was actually running. And then I can go and I can look at this and see who's the individual vendor here. Like in this case, we have a lot of Azul, our own JVM running. But what I would do is I would prune and filter this report to identify oracles so that even without me having to go back and scan that system, if Oracle got on there for any particular reason, we would identify the execution of that JVM and let people query it automatically. And that would save people time on just keeping track of, did this thing come back into my environment?
It sounds like you're able to leverage our same discovery process, but in a more real-time fashion.
Right. What we're trying to do here is to coordinate a lot of information so that people get good visibility on Java, really turning it from an unmanaged problem into a managed one where now they have a handle on all those JVMs that they were using. So the chart that you had before, where we go through, we do a discovery, we do a lot of analysis, we can keep that discovery continually up to date. Both up to and after that multi-million-dollar timeline has passed. So let's say I achieve the multi-million-dollar timeline because your team has a 100% success rate of doing migrations, which is great. I don't want them to come back 30 days later and say, let's take a look now. Have we accidentally gone back into your environment so that I can just slap you with that bill right away? That would not be a good one.
Oh, it would.
No. All right. So let's talk a little more about the desktop environments in terms of why are people reinstalling Java onto those environments? Like why, can you elaborate a little more about the difference of the level of control that people have on servers versus the level of control that they have on desktops?
Sure. Like I said, it all comes down to who's in charge of the machine. With your servers, you typically have an admin team that's a very limited number of people. Those people all have the same priorities and the same methods and policies, and they're usually all on the same page. And so we don't see it very often in the server world. But in the desktop user space, most desktop users have some level of admin privileges over their machine so that they're not flooding their leadership with software requests. So it may not even be that they're intentionally trying to get a version of Java. They may find a software tool out there that solves a problem for them, and they are really just trying to install that piece of software. what they may not know is that software comes with its own version of Java that's bundled inside it. And so while they've simply installed a tool, they've also inadvertently reintroduced Oracle branded Java back into their environment, creating a licensing concern for the infrastructure teams.
Got it. All right. So we have a number of customers across the enterprise base who are facing these multi-million-dollar deadlines. They know that there's a timeline coming up, or they've just had to do their own deadline, and they say, I don't want to do this next year. So you have a 100% success rate of migrating teams away to mitigate those multi-million-dollar bills so that they can get their budgets back to themselves. So for those organizations who are worried about Java compliance and either don't want to pay that first check or don't want to pay the second one, how can they do this type of migration and save themselves all of that work and money that they would otherwise need to do?
It's real simple. Just reach out and talk to us. They're not going to have anything we haven't seen before, and we've got a migration strategy that we can tailor to any part of their environment.
Sounds awesome. Anyone who is looking to do a Java migration, or maybe you don't want to do your migration, but you're being forced to, reach out to us and we'll be happy to take a look. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Have a great day.
So much.